Recorded.
Okay, so welcome to today's Tech Hour. It's Thursday, June the 8th, 2023, and I'm delighted to be able to talk today about NumFOCUS, which is a charity, a non-profit in the US that promotes open source scientific software. And it's, so to speak, general purpose rather than specialized. So if you're interested in software for doing a particular physical problem, not so good. But if you're interested in open source software to give you a toolkit to do things, then it's a very good starting point. And in particular, it's got a lot to do with integration and user interface and platforms for doing things. So really, NumFOCUS is about platforms, just as Tech and LaTeX is a platform for typesetting. So NumFOCUS provides a platform for, roughly speaking, scientific computing, although I don't think they'd object if you use PyData tools for digital humanities. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And I have to select the window or screen. Here we go. So you should now be seeing my screen. And there's about 8 tabs being shown here. And I'll run you quickly through the tabs to give you an overview about what's happening. This is an overture, if you like. So this is the NumFOCUS homepage. And it's open source for science problems. That's roughly speaking what it's doing. We'll go through that later. This is a really interesting page. It's the impact report from NumFOCUS. So they used to do an annual report and they call it an impact report. And this is something that explains what they've been able to do with the resources they've been able to get. So this is an accountability and promotional thing. And it's a less dry version of the annual report. And we'll go through this with a bit of detail. And I'm going to pause to give you opportunities to ask questions, even if I don't know the answers. The next one is a bit of history of NumFOCUS. The main thing we need to know at the moment was it's founded in 2012, which is actually, we're halfway through the what's the word? We've had 12 years. It was founded 12 years into the millennia, and we're now 24 years into the millennia. Here's its blog, which has moved, and here's its new location. I've not looked at these pages before half an hour ago, so I don't know what's on them. This is Project Jupiter, which is a publishing platform of sorts. But it's a publishing platform for interactive science, and a large part of it is a kernel. You can hook it up to a kernel that does computations, then it provides a front end for publishing the computations and reproducing the computations. So Jupiter and Jupiter Hub are very important for reproducible science. Here's a site search. I'll make it a bit bigger. I searched on the NumFOCUS site for LaTeX. And what's interesting is that we don't get many reports. We don't get many pages coming up. And the two most important pages are MathJax, which should be very familiar to us, which is LaTeX for the web. And then there's something I haven't heard of, which is Bouquet. I think I've pronounced it correctly. Maybe it's Bouquet. And it's a graphing software. And it got funding, and we'll get to that in a moment perhaps, it got funding to add LaTeX labels to its graphs. It got $10,000 of funding in, I think, 2023 to allow LaTeX labels provided by MathJax to appear in the graphs that we're seeing on this page. So let's go back to the beginning. And we'll go to the home page. And I don't suppose the space shuttle represents the pinnacle of human scientific achievement at this time, but this recognizable image, let's just move on. It sponsors projects. So by and large, NumPy is an umbrella organization. or if you like, it's a bit like the United Nations, or it's a federal organization, if you like. I'm not sure about its governance structure, but it has projects that have a large degree of independence, but they also have a large degree of relationship. And the relationship between projects is really important. You can support NumPy. It has programs for training, for teaching, for diversity. It has a newsletter. Now, here are the sponsored projects, and they will just scroll through in the traditional way we get on websites. And some of these projects and icons you might know, and some of them you won't. The ones that have got a snake on them are something to do with Python. They've got a pie in them, they've got something to do with Python. Quanticon, R, we've heard of that. SunPy, that's probably solar science. YT, I don't know what that is. Don't know what this is. Condaforge. MathJax. Dask is for marshalling data for high performance computing. That's something to do with Python. Pandas is to do with Python. Jupyter's to do with Python because there's a Y in it. And I think we're starting to repeat ourselves. Julia is not to do with Python, and it's a scientific computing platform. So there's a jobs board. So this is really important because if you want to sell NumPy or some other tools to your employer would want to say, well, what happens when you leave? Can we get a replacement? Is there a jobs board? What's the market? Can I find people who've got skills? So a jobs board is a large part of making training worthwhile. PyData is a series of conferences, I've been to one of them, relating to Python and data. And actually, some of you may have been to a PyData talk without knowing it, because before the pandemic, so that'll be about 3 years ago, Brandon Rhodes gave a talk at a PyData meeting, and there were about 150 people in the audience, on his experiments with typesetting. Yeah, and there was a well-attended meeting, and I was physically in the audience. And as I remember, I said, well, this is probably the best attended meeting in typesetting for the year. And subsequently, that talk, the video of that talk, was a keynote at one of the online TUG conferences. So a large number of tech TUG members have actually been to a PyData talk via the keynote that Brandon replayed at the TUG conference, I think it was 2 years ago. There's a shop for getting mugs and all sorts of other things, clothing, so forth. And then there's the impact report, which we'll be getting onto later. And here are the sponsors, and we'll let them go through. I don't know any of these. I know some of these. Bloomberg, I know. Bloomberg in London hosted the PyData conference. They've got a fantastic building that costs several billion. NVIDIA are very important for graphics cards, which are graphics accelerators. Plotly is a graphing library. QuantSight is for quantum insights. Gordon and Betty Moore, that's Moore's law. Anaconda is something to do with Python. It's a different snake. Facebook. Now, the Chan and what's his first name? Zuckerberg Foundation funds various things, and TUG President Boris Weitzman works for them. And in one of his TUG posts, he mentioned that Chan and Mark Zuckerberg Foundation are supporting a project that's a NumFOCUS project. So all the big names are here, and the sponsors are doing it not entirely out of the goodness of their hearts. So the hardware vendors are getting involved in this because the availability of tools is very important for the sale of hardware. So there's a newsletter, and we've got the usual stuff at the bottom. Code of conduct, it's got a code of conduct. I'll put that in the tabs. The events, I'll put those in the tabs. And there's a site map, legal documents. Okay, so we'll skip those two and we'll go on to the impact report. I've been about 15 minutes now. I think during the impact report, I can see all of you, and you can also raise a virtual hand. So if you want to stop me, or if you just want to talk and say, please, can you say something about it, or I've got a question, then pitch in. So let's see if we can make this a bit bigger. There, that's probably big enough. So as I said earlier, founded in 2012, and a lot's happening. There's an executive director who I've not met. This is Travis Oliphant, who is the founding chair of NumFOCUS, and he and a number of other people got together. He is, I believe, the main developer of NumPy, which is, how do I explain it? Okay, if you're a C or Fortran programmer, you know that vector operations are really important for numerical analysis. So there what you have is you have an array or a matrix, and you perform the same operation, but on different inputs, and you just do it at high speed across the whole thing. And NumPy is a way of manipulating and handling these things through Python. So essentially, you have an orchestra, if you like, of objects that can do computation. You've got all this data, you've got this massive data that you want to flow through some processor. And the Python part of NumPy does, so to speak, the marshalling, gives the high level instructions. Do this operation on this block of data and put the result here. And it's a way of getting the convenience of Python together with the performance of low-level languages. So the low-level stuff is done at close to native speeds, possibly by using native machine code. And the high-level stuff about describing what you want to do is done in convenient language that you can develop interactively. So that's, roughly speaking, what NumPy is. And in particular, it allows you to use memory efficiently. So if you've only got 16 gigabytes of memory, you can use most of it for storing data. The great thing about arrays is that you don't need to use more overhead than is required to store the data. It's just everything's in this regular pattern, and so you just move the pointer, move the address to move on to the next item. Whereas Python, because it's flexible, you have to have a large overhead for every object. Every object requires its own information. So this is NumPy going back 10 years, and we've got a history page to come up. So this says, I think there were 74 events in the last year in 20 countries with 31,000 attendees. I'm not sure I believe 31,000, because that makes it sound as though there's 500 attendees for each event, which sounds a bit high. On the other hand, some conferences do have 1,000 or 2,000 attendees, and maybe we count all the people who've registered for an online conference as an attendee. This figure of 23 million is distributed in project support over the 12 years. So that's approximately 2 million a year. And of course, it's increased recently. It sort of got off to a slow start, I believe, and then now it's increased. And in particular, there's been 700,000 given in small development grants. Now, by way of comparison, the annual income of TUG is, I think, about $100,000. So in small focus grants, I think this is over the 12 years, this number. The tutorials, data is a wide range of conferences, and actually there's a weekly Pi Data meeting in London, usually somewhere in the financial district or that sort of thing, where there's a lot of quantitative analysis. And I've been to a few of those, and you have 100 or 200 people attending these things. So these are Pi Data weekly meetups, but then there's also tutorials which bring people in. And for a long time, I identified NumFOCUS with Pi Data. And I go back to around 2000, I thought I need a language other than Python macros to do things relating to text processing. And I chose Python because of its community. And that turned out to be a good decision, because 12 years later, NumFOCUS came into being. And a further 12 years later, we're looking at this website together. They distribute their stickers. So when I went to the Pi Data conference in Bloomberg in London, I was able to pick up stickers to put on my laptop for the projects that I used or was interested in. And they provide legal services. The latest news I've heard relating to legal services is that the Python package index, which is a distribution platform for Python, is a sort of for Python packages, has been requested to provide information by American FBI or similar agencies, and they can't refuse legally. And they're wanting to, in a sensible way, restrict the amount of information they provide so that they don't hold IP addresses unless there's a good reason to. And one reason to hold IP addresses is to throttle people who are excessively downloading. And you can do that by hashing the IP address, for example. So you can read all that stuff, that sort of stuff, on the register if you want to. There's also problems with trademarks and European law and data protection. So the legal services, I'm sure that these are being provided for good reason. Now they have sponsored projects and affiliated projects. I'm not sure what the difference is. MathJax is a sponsored project. So they now have 55 sponsored projects, of which 12 have been added this year, and 57 affiliated. I guess affiliated is more loosely connected. And there are 16 new ones this year. And I don't know how the contributors are calculated and the research citations are calculated, but these people are Pi Data and they should be getting these numbers, right? Okay, so Katrina Reel, President, NumFOCUS Board of Directors. So this is an important post, and she's got involved. Let's move on. So project support. So it supports projects. So in a sense, you don't go to NumFOCUS for a solution. You go to a project that's run by NumFOCUS or sponsored by NumFOCUS. So if you want math on web pages, you go to MathJax. MathJax is the place for getting math onto web pages. And you might use MathJax for 10, 15, 20 years without knowing that it's a NumFOCUS project. But if you give money to MathJax, you'll be at this point directed through NumFOCUS, and NumFOCUS will handle the administration and the non-profit and all of that aspects of it, and will provide coordination and the services that an umbrella organization provides. So these are the sponsored organizations, and I don't know many of them. QPi is probably Barracuda Pi, I'm guessing. PyBAM, I don't know what that is. Worldwide Telescope. I think that might be interesting if you're an astronomer. They seem to like these, what's the word? Graphical images. I don't know what this is. It might have something to do with fault track. I'm just guessing. And I don't know what this is. MathJax, I know what this is. DASC, I happen to know, it's a data archiving and recovery scheme. So it's a way of, if you've got a powerful computer, and when I say powerful, I mean a room-full size computer, or at least a workstation, getting the stuff in and getting the stuff out again, it is a big problem. And DASC is designed to solve that problem of getting the data in and out. And then we've got some other things which I don't know. Econometrics, I guess. YT, I don't know what that is. It might be something to do with the solar system. Pi tables, pandas. This is an interactive shell for Python. Julia is very interesting, and I'd like to talk more about it. Jupyter Notebooks is a challenger for the role of producing interactive scientific publications because it runs on a reproducible kernel. We've got R Open Science. SymPy is a sort of variant of Mathematica that runs on Python. We'll find out what Project YT is if we listen to the video, but we won't. And then they have small development grants, £5,000 to £10,000. And they funded last year 37 projects, £225,000. So that's actually about 30% of the funding was given last year. So this seems to be something that's growing in size. And £5,000 to £10,000 is, from the point of view of the tech users group, a medium or large grant. I think they generally grant $1,000, $2,000, $3,000. So this is quite interesting, and I'll just let you see some of these things. GeoPandas is something to do with geographical information systems. Pomegranate is something to do with fruit. Geomscale, orange, that's something else to do with fruit. Qtip, TaskFlow, Blosk, Cantera. I think that might be recording software, I'm not sure. Conda Forge. Conda is Anaconda, is related to Python. Julia we've seen. So Julia is a big project, and here it's advancing Julia, outreach and community efforts that it's providing. Fortran, compiling SciPy with Fortran. So I was right, the F was for Fortran. Nelson should be excited at this point. So this is using, so you write in SciPy, the project is you write in SciPy, and then the code that is executed is compiled using Fortran. This sort of approach is quite common now. So you write in a restricted version of a high-level language, and because it's a restricted version, because you have the tool chain, you can use more advanced tools in terms of performance. Let's see what else we got. ND analysis, Napari, OpenFHA, PyTables. PyTables leverage the HDF5 enhanced direct trunk capabilities. PyTables is very different from LaTeX tables. LaTeX tables is about typesetting a table, and perhaps it runs 20 or 30 pages. This is about processing data that spans gigabytes, possibly. SciPy, what are they doing? Faster random variate, sampling from SciPy, statistical distribution. So here it's miscellaneous, I'll use miscellaneous, that's not the word, things that need attention. So the small development grants are for things that need attention. So SymPy, usability improvements. Now that's interesting because there's big interest in accessibility, or there should be. And accessibility improvements is something that our friends in the archive are very, very keen on. And if there was an archive project related to, if there was a NumFOCUS project, a NumFOCUS sponsored project, or related to accessibility of documents, then small development grants could go through this route. And the other thing is that big sponsors, such as the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, could give money to SciPy, to NumFOCUS, and then NumFOCUS could allocate it according to the grantor's wishes. So the small development grants, so to speak, I'm hypothesizing here, or speculating here, that a large grant from a major donor can go to NumFOCUS and again can be broken down to small development grants, which means that the overhead of, so that a large donor doesn't have to deal with a large number of small grants. There we go. TARDIS, that's something to do with time travel, obviously. Oh, support for the conference. Looks like it's a new project and they want to have a conference and they're getting a few $1,000s so they can have a conference. Good luck to them. PVlib, don't know what this is. Pyrone. Helping users build workflows with ontological typing. Well, somebody's obviously looked into this and had the idea, and NumFOCUS has said it's a thing. We're willing to give it some money. Spider, that must be something to do with Python. Archives. Abstract plotting backend interface. That's intriguing. And we've gone back to the beginning, I think. So we're going through the B's, BLOSC and Julia. And Julia enables seamless geospatial computing in Julia with the geo interface. So Julia must have people who are already doing this sort of computing, but it's got seams and lumps and bumps in the road. And they want to have an interface that allows this computing to be done in a seamless way. As a pure mathematician, I'm aware that there are these things called differential manifolds, the simplest example of which is the sphere. The sphere can be covered with affine pieces, and then you do the computation in whichever piece is convenient. I think that's enough of that, and I've gone on for half an hour. Project Summit, 45 projects and other people gathered in Santa Rosa, California, better together, in-person gathering, cross-project community collaboration. 2 days of interactive discussion and all sorts of other things. So this is leaders, managers, developers from a large number of projects getting together so that they know each other better. That's probably it. Representatives from 45 projects. It'd be interesting to know how many people are actually there. Representatives from 45 projects, plus the board, the advisory council, and the staff. So there must have been about 90 people there, I reckon, which is about the size of a tech conference. Probably double, well, yeah, about the size of a tech conference. Testimonials. So Wolfgang is with TARDIS. Astrophysics and computational mathematics. Sponsored project metrics. So this is about community strength. Understand the health of contributor communities. So it's sort of eating your own dog food, which is understanding data. So we look at the data we've got regarding our community and we say, well, what are the indicators? What's the prospects? How are things improving? And then people can small development grants committee. I've got my eye on a small development grant, just as a way of understanding NumFOCUS and what NumFOCUS might be able to do for me. Then there's community outreach, PyData conferences. It's got lots of Twitter followers, lots of YouTube subscribers, virtual meetups. It's got a fairly good geographical distribution. It's certainly got South America and Africa, which is quite important. PyData Global. Don't know what this is. Oh, all right. These are all people who are doing things. PyData Global by the numbers. So I don't know anything about PyData Global. I've never heard of it before. I came across it just now. These are the in-person conferences. This is the one of the meetings I went to 3 years ago. 460 attendees in London for 3 days. Yerevan. Ooh, Berlin. 1,000. Miami, 102. There we go. New York, 675. Eindhoven, that's Philips Electronics, 400. So these conferences are having 400 or so attendees or more. Yeah, we're going back again. Here's Jupyter. Accessibility is a big issue in Jupyter, and I don't think they're able to solve it just yet. And I suspect it requires a ground-up rethink, which is difficult. So if the archive project for accessibility is successful, then maybe there's some contribution they could make to Jupyter. Or maybe there's at least some point in having a conversation here. Diversity, equality, inclusion, contributor diversification and retention, the Gordon Betty Moore Foundation, impact scholarships, I'm not sure what this is, but it's something to do with getting people when they're young. And I don't know what this is. Grants, this is the Zuckerberg initiative, which is supporting Bokeh, which, I think Bokeh might have been the project that Boris Weitzman Tug President talked about in one of his messages. So certainly Boris works for the Chan Zuckerberg initiative, and 8 of these projects got funding from CZOI. So that's an endorsement of sorts from Boris. And it's an example of how the philanthropy, if you like, works. And then we've got the corporate sponsors. We've got the usual people. Google Open Source, Anaconda are very big in providing a platform for Python data science. Amazon Web Services provide the computers. Bloomberg provide customers. I don't know who Bo.ai is, but it must be AI. IBM is IBM. T. Rowe Price, I don't know who they are. I don't know who POSIT is, I'm afraid. Sustaining, ESR, European Science Research Institute, perhaps. Microsoft, NVIDIA. 2 Sigma, Taipei, I don't know who they are, but I bet they're Python. QRT, I don't know. And then we've got Hopworks, IMC, Quansight, Safe Software, Shopify, Coordinates, MapGears, Notable, Moderna, Chan Zuckerberg, Alfred P. Sloan, Gordon Moore. Alfred P. Sloan is a big philanthropic organization that is known for giving Sloan fellowships for scholarship for a long time. Oh, the financials are interesting, and I'm going to stop. I think I'm going to have to stop at this point. So this is the financials, I assume, for 2023. Sorry, 2022, because that's the report. So donations, 1.5 million. Mostly corporate. Grants, that seems to be the really big thing. is that they will get grants from grant-giving bodies which are restricted for the project. And probably you have to bid for the grant and so forth. Program services, so events produce an income. So a Pi data event provides income for NumFOCUS, and events have provided nearly 2 million. So this is sponsorship for Google Season of Docs, Google Summer of Code, for example. But the main thing is events bringing in money. And then we've got project service agreements. I'm not sure what this is. Merchandise sales, interest. So we've got 10 million of revenue last year. Speaking as if it's my own money, it's not, although I have contributed to NumFOCUS before. 8 million approximately restricted and 2 million unrestricted. So if you want to get, I don't think anybody here is in the position of giving large sums of money to NumFOCUS, but if you want to get money from NumFOCUS, you have to understand what the restricted projects are. And if you really want a large sum of money, then somehow you have to persuade NumFOCUS to apply for one of these grants. But there's plenty of money there. Then the expenditures, supporting the projects, 1.5 million, accounting, cloud computing, community engagement platforms. I assume that's things like blogs and wikis, communication services, consulting, a few $1,000s on legal, payroll, that's the big thing. So they have extensive staff, and I assume that they're managed by a board of directors. For comparison, Tug's payroll is approximately 60,000 out of 100,000 is spent on payroll. Project direct expenses, so these are things going, I think, directly to projects. I'm not sure. Development documentation. I assume that this is money that's gone to the project for the development and maintenance of whatever the project is concerned with. And community management is perhaps hiring people to be forum moderators, provide other services. You just have to look at this, and it probably varies from project to project. Program services, Pi data and project events, sponsorship, small development grants. Yeah, these are the small development grants. Administrative services, bank charges, equipment supplies, insurance, office expenses, software, travel. Okay, so that's your 6 million. This is a history of how it goes. These are the history of all the projects. So AstroPi, something to do with astronomy, income of 28,288. Oh, these are sizable figures. These are sizable figures of numbers. Gloss, bouquet, here's bouquet. Okay, so it had an income. It seems that people are giving money to this project and it's not being spent yet, because the difference in the income and the expenditure was 130,000. And so it's got money in the bank that it's not spending. Cantera is quite a small project. QPi. Well, that's interesting. Money in the bank again. Task. Let's look at my, oh, here's Julia. Okay, so we're learning something about these projects. Jupiter's big. I mean, the project's big. I didn't mean, we know Jupiter's big. MathJax. We've got a very small balance. Its income and its expenses are largely balanced. And I assume that most of the expenses are software development. And then here are the people who are in charge of all this. This is the executive director. We saw her at the beginning. Director of Events, Business Development, Developer Advocate, Operations Manager, Grants Manager, Events Manager, I think Events Manager seems to be the biggest job here. Board of Directors, so all of these people have got some sort of background in using things, and then we've got the great and the good that form the advisory council, one of whom is Travis Alvent, one of the founders of the whole thing. And we come to the bottom of the page. So I've now spoken with few pauses for 45 minutes, or getting on for that. I think it's probably time for me to stop talking. So I'll stop talking. Nelson, you want to say something?
I was just going to comment that you mentioned among the sponsors was NVIDIA, and NVIDIA just a week ago reached the $1 trillion company evaluation. It's now larger than Intel by a good bit. So it's interesting that these companies are actually contributing money. I have not looking at how much they're contributing, but it's encouraging that they're recognizing the importance of a project like this. And I think it's nice to see that it seems to have been quite successful in supporting quite a number of projects that might be a model for other people involved in open source efforts to see whether you could get enough industrial sponsorship to make a go of it. It's always been the difficulty with open source work that it doesn't pay very much. For most people, it pays zero.
Well, the economic model of open source is sort of Linux, I think, was really changed the game. It's perhaps not an exaggeration to say that if it wasn't for an upstart having a punch-up verbal shenanigans with the developer of Minix, Andrew Tannenbaum, and that person then going on to create Linux, if it wasn't for Linux, I don't know where Unix would be.
Yeah,
it would be BSD
Foundation. The Linux Foundation budget is somewhere over $1 billion a year. By comparison, the FreeBSD, NetBSD, OpenBSD, their budgets are of the order of 100,000. So there's still, in most communities, a lot of people working for nothing or very low revenues.
So, sorry, the Linux Foundation budget is how much a year?
1 billion with a B.
1 billion with a B.
1,000 million, and as it used to be called in Britain.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole model of open source to some extent has changed. But
for example, we saw Red Hat being bought up by IBM a few years ago. And so what used to be a completely open source community for Red Hat is now part of a large corporation. Of course, IBM has spent many, many billions in support of Linux. So I give them credit for that. But it does also change the mindset in the development community. When you have a corporation behind you that's kind of controlling your salaries and income and expenses.
This is just something that's going through my mind, which is that weights and measures, standards. So weights and measures was one of the big areas where scientific standards first came into being. And you can't have a Microsoft inch and a Google inch and so forth. You've got to have interoperability for standards.
You would like to.
You've got to have interoperability for laws. And I think the big one was Microsoft embracing Linux. That was made not for moral reasons, but for business reasons, I'm sure. For business reasons.
There was even a proposal several months ago that Microsoft should jettison the Windows kernel and replace it with the Linux kernel for pretty strong reasons. And I think that would be interesting because the user experience in the Windows environment is the application software layer, the window manager, and the GUI interface and so on. But the kernel itself is enormous in the Windows world and has had way, way too many bugs.
I thought it was really interesting the way in which Next was built upon, I think it was BSD.
BSD plus Mach, the CMU developed kernel, microkernel.
Yeah, and you know the thing that gave Mac and still gives Mac the acme of usability and elegance and everything else like that underneath is Linux.
Yeah, it started out borrowing a great deal from FreeBSD and from Mach as well because of Steve Jobs' experience with Next. However, I think a great deal of Mac OS has evolved into an Apple-like environment where they relatively ignore standards outside and aren't particularly interested in communicating or working in anything but a desktop single-user environment. For example, they had for a small number of years rack-mounted servers with multiple processors, and now they produce only workstations. And their latest processor incarnation, the M2, has a limit of 64 gigabytes of memory in its largest version. And they've not engineered a solution that would allow additional memory to be available on boards that would be needed, say, in high-performance computing. So it's kind of a strange company in that sense that they really don't understand a computing system with large numbers of users. They focus exclusively on single-user communities.
Yeah.
As does Microsoft to a large extent. And since Chris is here, probably 15 or more years ago, Microsoft actually made an effort in conjunction with the Cornell computing facilities to have a supercomputer running Windows. But I don't think that was very successful, and I've not heard anything further of it. Perhaps, Chris, you've been
heard
around
about this effort
Cornell long enough to know.
No,
But
I've heard about it.
The top
the partnership
500 supercomputer sites, they're all running some flavor of Linux.
Yeah, I know it was an effort at one point, and I know that the support expired, but it was I'm aware of it as a project, but I'm not sure how successful it was in the end.
I think we live in challenging times, and when I decided to make NumFOCUS the theme of this, I sort of had a view of NumFOCUS that was probably, well, I had a pre-pandemic view of NumFOCUS. And it's approximately 12 years old, and my pre-pandemic view is probably 4 or 5 years old, and it's changed a great deal. And I think this is a challenging time, particularly, well, if you're young, it's a challenging time because all you see is the change and the innovation and the shiny things, and you don't see the things that the old people go on about. And the old people have got the opposite problem, of course, that they understand the eternal values, but they don't understand that they may not apply in exactly the same way. This report that I've just shown you from NumFOCUS, turns out it's not available in PDF. It used to be available in PDF. And it used to be, I think, available only in PDF, I should expect at one time. If you go back to 2012, I expect that the annual report was available only in PDF. It was a sort of corporate document, and it still is a corporate document, but it's a 2022, 23 corporate document, not a 2012 corporate document. So this change is important, and keeping things the same is also important. I'm thinking of, well, multiple constituencies. So speaking personally, I'm a pure mathematician. So the pure mathematics community, by and large, doesn't have much representation in NumFOCUS. And certainly the formal theorem proving, which I think is really important to me, or very interesting to me, doesn't appear in here at all. And I can't imagine Lean becoming a NumFOCUS project, although it is supported by Microsoft, directly supported by Microsoft. So that's one area. Then the other area is tech and the archive and accessibility of documents. And then I'm a Python developer, mainly for doing interesting things. And I also have an interest in using Git as a content addressable store and the stuff that's going on, if you like, with immutable operating systems. So there's a lot going on. And if I take myself back 20 years, a lot of the stuff that's going on wasn't a thing at that time. Jupyter notebooks weren't a thing at that time. The things that were things were computers with possibly half a gigabyte of memory. And that was plenty of memory for the CPU you had. So the whole game has changed enormously, and the ease of collaboration has changed enormously as well. GitHub didn't exist. Git I think didn't exist 20 years ago or so. Now, tech and the archive, I hope nobody objects too much for me saying this, haven't changed much in 20, 25 years. There's been no what I would call big changes. And if you compare the two versions of the LaTeX companion, the previous version and the current one, you'll see that there's more stuff and perhaps it's better produced and so forth. Yeah, Nelson's got both. He's going to show us. So,
two hardcover volumes this thick. This is the third edition. The second edition was the size of half of one of these.
Yeah, so there's Mittelbach's law, isn't it? The size of the LaTeX companion doubles every 20 years. So where are we? I'm interested in how NumFOCUS is successful and is in an area related to what we're doing. I think most of us here. And the question is, we should not ignore it. I think that's the point. We should not ignore it. We should interact with it. And one way of interacting with it, well, we are already interacting with it. Every time MathJax appears on one of our web pages, we are interacting with NumFOCUS, because MathJax is a NumFOCUS project. And Bokeh has got funding to improve LaTeX labels in its diagrams. And Jupyter uses LaTeX via MathJax. So it would be quite useful, I think, as a tech community and also as people interested in the accessibility of mathematics from documents, from ordinary documents, from things that would otherwise be PDF documents. How is NumFOCUS relating to MathJax? You see, there was this community summit that was mentioned in the annual report with about 100 people, I guess, at it. And I don't suppose MathJax was much discussed there. But to have a Math on the Web summit with involvement from organizations in NumFOCUS, and other organizations such as the Lean Theorem Prover and anybody else such as the math publishers, learned societies, might be a useful thing. So if NumFOCUS could be persuaded to help organize a conference or a summit or a meeting similar to its community projects summit that I showed in the impact report, that's sort of one way forward. And there are probably other ways forward. But the routes available to an individual are very small. NumFOCUS is, how do we say, too big for an individual like me to have a conversation with. I'm too small to talk with them. And I'm certainly much too small to talk with to the Betty and Gordon Moore Foundation. NumFOCUS can talk with big foundations and get not trillions, not billions, but perhaps $1 million from one and $1 million from another. The largest funding I've got, I think, was £30,000 for a MathTran project, and that was from JISC, which was research funding, roughly speaking, a part of British academia. And I was able to get that because I was working for the Open University, and the Open University supported the project and provided matching funding. So I have some track record in this. And being well placed to do whatever it is you want to do isn't straightforward. I think the archive was well placed to ask for funding, but it probably, what's the word, needs some partners. So maybe thinking of getting funding via NumFOCUS from a foundation relating to mathematical accessibility might be a way forward. And I'm not saying it's a good idea or not. I'm saying it's a good idea to have a look. And there are other things that are worth looking at. So that's my, I'll get down off my soapbox, as they say. Did you know that soap came in boxes? That's where the phrase comes from. Get up on a soapbox. When I was a child, oranges came in boxes. They were put in boxes. And also tea came in chests, which were made out of plywood and had some sort of waterproof, airproof lining to them.
And they litter the bottom of the Boston Harbor.
Well, I think that was different. That Boston Harbor was different from my childhood. But from my childhood, we had a tea
chest they dumped overboard.
Yeah, they might very well have been shipped in barrels at that time. I did read a report of books that have been printed but not bound. That was quite common. You print a book, and then, but you wouldn't bind it, because that was the job of the library, which was a gentleman's library, or aristocracy. An aristocrat might have a library, and part of the library's function would be to bind the books that came in. So anyway, I have read of books being shipped in barrels, and barrels were probably the containers of their time. Just as in Greek times, there were three important liquids that were traded. They were olive oil and wine and honey. And they were traded in vessels called amphora. So amphora were the containers of the time, just as containers are the containers of our time. Anyway, I'm going off on a bit of that was the day. So thank you all for your participation. And it's past, so anybody that wants to go can go if they want to.
Thank you for introducing us to NumFOCUS, Jonathan. I was completely unaware of it. And it's interesting to see an apparently successful project that has a multi-million-dollar budget that's supporting many other smaller projects. And that's something that certainly should be of interest to the tech community. Perhaps even a a brief article in Tugboat or a note in TechHacks might be a useful thing to post to just spread the idea that there could be funding from an organization like this.
Yeah, I think so. I think that well, we've got the video, you see, so there'll be the video, and what I'm personally interested in is some goals that people will be interested in. Bye, Shamsi, and thank you for your note. A sort of, once you've got a vague idea of things, having a good question is a great way to learn. So questions about NumFOCUS, and you know, sort of people, it's something that we need to, I think that my community, by which I mean the tech community, and I think the archive is part of the tech community, and I think they would benefit by having more of a engagement with the NumFOCUS community. A large part of the NumFOCUS community comes from Python, who are very strong in web development. So, which is why Jupyter Notebooks came from the Python community originally. And the web development side of accessible mathematics is something where the NumFOCUS community, by and large, has strength, I think. You know, they don't have difficulty with websites in the way that some of us might. But at the same time, we've got strength in sort of difficult mathematical content and mathematical typesetting and richly structured documents, and probably more of a relationship with users for whom the lack of accessibility is a problem. Because the NumFOCUS people are probably the people who've managed to jump through all the hoops and hurdles necessary to become a software developer. Whereas the blind math people are the people who are trying to jump through all the hoops and hurdles to learn some mathematics. So they're closer to being ordinary users. So a good question, I think, is what can we bring to the NumFOCUS community that they can't so easily get themselves? What do we have to bring to them? What do we have to offer them?